So Daniel 8, we've been going through Daniel for many, many months now, and as we came to chapter 8, it is one of those chapters that is an interesting one. It's a tricky one, and chapter 9 even more so. So for those of you who have been away or visiting, then we have been going verse by verse through Daniel from chapter 1, verse 1, and we now find ourselves at chapter 8 and verse 15. So that's where we're picking up, Daniel 8 and verse 15. Let me just get my glasses clear, otherwise I won't be able to see the text either. Okay, so what we saw last time as we came in was that Daniel, who's had these visions through the book, initially there was Nebuchadnezzar's vision, which is the very famous one in chapter 2. The vision of the statue, the image, and it has these 4 sections representing 4 different types of kingdom, and he, Nebuchadnezzar, is the head of gold, and then we have the various kingdoms going through. And so what we have is we have the Jewish people taken into captivity. They, for their history, have pretty much ruled themselves for the most part, with a few exceptions here and there. But now they've been taken into captivity, and though the captivity is only going to be for 70 years, we are now entering this period where the Jews will be ruled, again, predominantly, there are exceptions, today would be one of those exceptions, but predominantly they are ruled by other nations, by Gentile nations. And so we enter into what theologians refer to as the time of the Gentiles. So Daniel 2, with that initial image, is giving us a picture of the span of the time of the Gentiles and the kingdoms that will exist from now, Nebuchadnezzar, right the way through the various kingdoms until the very end, when the last kingdom will be destroyed by the stone that comes and establishes a kingdom that will fill the whole earth, and that is the coming of Christ at the second coming and the establishing of his kingdom over all the earth. It will not do for us to believe that that is Jesus coming at his first coming, because the kingdoms that are expressed, the other kingdoms that are expressed there, are physical kingdoms, and there's no reason throughout the book of Daniel to think of the last one as being anything other than that. When we came to chapter 7, Daniel had a vision directly himself, and he saw specifically beasts. And we saw that as we came to chapter 7, that we were seeing, as we started the Aramaic section of Daniel with the vision, we have the vision again at the end of that section, and we see that these beasts emphasize the demonic nature of these kingdoms. Now this is important as we come into this week's sermon. We have seen throughout the book of Daniel this principle that is expressed so clearly in the Psalms and in the other prophets and elsewhere, that when you have human kings, you have heavenly kings. When you have earthly rulers, you have heavenly rulers. That, as it was said by Moses in Deuteronomy, that when God allocated the nations, he allocated them to the sons of God. And that there are various demonic rulers, angelic beings overseeing things. And we're going to see that even more clearly as we go on through the book of Daniel. And so when we came last week to chapter 8, Daniel has another vision, a separate vision from the one in chapter 7. And here we have beasts again. Specifically, we have a ram and we have a goat. And that's what we saw last time. And as we saw last time, the ram represents the Medo-Persian Empire. There's 2 horns. One horn is slightly bigger than the other because the Persians were slightly more powerful than the Medes. But you have this 2-horned kingdom. And of course, at the time that he has this vision, it is still future. And then, although he would, of course, come to see it pass. But then we have the coming of the goat, the male goat that's going to come and trample the ram. And the goat is going to come, and the goat is going to be the Greek Empire, one that Daniel never lived to see. We spoke about this last time, that there is a conspicuous horn on this goat, which is the one ruler, Alexander the Great. And then from that horn there comes 4 horns, which is the 4 rulers that after a period of civil war came to take over the Greek Empire following the death of Alexander the Great. So really for us in Daniel 8 we're reading a lot of history, because these are things that have now happened in the past, although Daniel never lived to see them. The thing that was emphasized though last time was that there was a little horn that came up out of one of the 4 horns. And in the area of Syria, one of the 4 areas of Alexander's kingdom that was split up, there came a man called Antiochus IV, known as Antiochus Epiphanes, because he believed that God manifested himself through him. And this man was the one that was the focus of our text last week. And again, he's a historical figure, but what was fascinating was all the terminology we saw last week that seemed to speak of angelic beings. And there was this linking of him with the angelic realm. And that ultimately, he was one that was going to take away the offerings, take away the sacrifices, take away the Jewish distinctiveness, and he would commit what became to be known as the abomination of desolation. That he insisted that rather than worshipping God, that they worshipped him. And it seems, and this is what I concluded last time, because of all the language speaking of angelic powers, angelic beings, terminology such as host and prince of hosts and what have you, that there was some sort of angelic power enabling him, that his oppression of the Jewish people, his oppression of God's people, was something that was demonically inspired in some way, shape or form. And that's really where we left it last time. Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn coming up from the 4th horn of the Greek Empire, and Antiochus Epiphanes, he rises up and he destroys the Jewish people. And this is now history. This has happened. And it happened for a period of, as we see at the end there, 2,300 days in verse 14. Now, 2 more things from the text from last week as we move forwards to this week. Okay? 2 more things. Firstly, we know historically that this happened. We know historically that this happened because we all know about Hanukkah. And we talked about this a little bit last time. Hanukkah is the feast of dedication. And after the 2,300 days, they rededicated the temple when Antiochus Epiphanes was ousted by the Maccabean revolt. Then they were able to re-establish the temple. So we know that this happened historically. But the second thing is that we have had reference in the book of Daniel to a little horn previously, going way back. But here's the crucial thing. The little horn of chapter 7 is a little horn that comes out of the 4th kingdom, not out of the 3rd kingdom. So when we go to the original 4 kingdoms in chapter 2 and repeated in chapter 7, we have the Babylonian Empire, then we have the Medo-Persian Empire, then we have the Greek Empire, that's the 3rd one, and then we have the 4th empire, an empire of imperialism that begins with the Romans and goes through to our present day. We, I believe, now have gone away from the pure iron of the Romans to this iron-clay mix that's referred to in chapter 2. And so in chapter 7, the little horn, deliberately using the same terminology, is a little horn that comes up from the 4th empire, the imperialism, the iron and clay, rather than from the 3rd empire, the Greek empire. In other words, and this is important as we move forwards, there will be an Antiochus Epiphanes type character at the end of the 4th kingdom as he was at the end of the 3rd kingdom. So, in other words, he is a type of what is to come at the end of the 4th kingdom. He is a type. Now listen, I know that many outside our circles will hear us reference end time stuff and talk about the Antichrist and things like that, and they'll say, oh, you know, all this weird revelation stuff, you can't possibly understand all that, and you know, it'll you know, you get the pan-millennialist, it'll all pan out in the end, let's not worry about it too much. But what I want us to understand is this: that we are now in the book of Daniel. When we go chronologically through the Bible, the little horn of the fourth kingdom, the Antichrist as we call him, has already been referenced 3 times. He was spoken of in the book of Isaiah, he was spoken of in the book of Ezekiel, and he's spoken of here in the book of Daniel. The Antichrist is not some weird figure that we've plucked out of the book of Revelation, but rather he in the book of Daniel is somebody who is directly paralleled with who for us now is an historical figure in Antiochus Epiphanes. We know who Antiochus Epiphanes was. We don't have to refer to him as a mysterious little horn. We know his name because he's an historical figure. And so we can see what he did, and we know that what the next little horn will do will be a very similar thing. One is a type of the other. So this idea that some people have that somehow, the Antichrist, oh, well, this weird Revelation stuff, we're nowhere near the book of Revelation. We're not even in the New Testament. And we are not finished in the book of Daniel with revelation about the Antichrist. There's going to be a whole bunch more. And the reason for this long introduction and recap is that much of what we're going to see is today. Because when we come to verse 15, we see that Daniel says, well, I, Daniel, have seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And then what we lead into is we lead into a passage of interpretation. And at first glance, some of you might have thought last week when I finished at verse 14, oh, he's gonna start again in verse 15 and we're going to get the interpretation. So he's just going to repeat last week's sermon because we've already interpreted it last week. But in fact, when the interpretation is given, the biggest focus of the interpretation is not the Medo-Persian kingdom. It's not the Greek kingdom. It's not even the little horn of the Greek kingdom. It is the little horn that is going to rise up, that this initial little horn is going to be a type of. In other words, the main focus of this passage becomes the Antichrist, as we shall see. So, let's dig in and have a look. So Daniel seeks to understand the vision. He's seen the vision, he seeks to understand it. And remember, as we saw last time, when he has the vision, he's not just having some sort of dream, he's not having a little daydream or a little sense of this or that, but he is in his mind's eye, he is transported to a different place at a different time in history. It's as if he's there. This is not some mildly charismatic sort of pondering that he's doing. He is taken to a place where he sees something. And now he's kind of presumably, verse 15, back in his room, and he is confused and he wants to understand what he's seen. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. Now, as is going to become very clear in the next few verses, we are talking here about angelic beings. I'm guessing most of you know this, but I'm not entirely sure, so I'll say it anyway. For some people, this is pretty standard now. For others of you, this could be shattering your very world. So hold tight. Angels don't have wings. Okay? I know some people get very funny about this, okay? Seraphim, cherubim, other angelic beings do, but angels themselves, whenever they appear in Scripture, they appear to be a man. In fact, they're often mistaken for humans. Large humans, powerful humans, perhaps gigantic humans, but humans nonetheless. When the Apostle Peter was arrested and he was put into prison, and then the Lord frees him from prison, and he comes to the doors of the saints, and they open the door and they see Peter, and they're like, well, he can't be there, he's in prison, maybe it's his angel. Nobody said it can't be his angel because there's no huge wings on the back of him. They just said maybe it's his angel. Angels always appear as mighty men. That's how it always is, Old and New Testament, throughout Scripture. Do not fall into this sort of superstitious, traditional imagery of angels with wings. Not a biblical concept. So there stood one before me having the appearance of a man. I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called. So So here he is wanting to understand the vision, and here within this location of the vision, there is a voice calling. Now, again, it seems to me that maybe he's back in his room and oh, what did that mean? And he's hearing the calling from, as if the vision is now happened and distant, and he's hearing the calling from there. Does that kind of make sense? It was as if he was taken somewhere, he's now back, and now he's hearing the calling. Other people may interpret this that he's still in the midst of the vision, wondering what it is, and that the angels appear to him in the vision. I tend to see it more, not that it particularly matters, but I tend to see it more as the calling coming from the place where the vision happened. Anyway, this is what the other man says. The other man calls, and this other man, or the one, an appearance of a man, is unnamed, and calls and says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So there's two characters here. One is not named, and one is Gabriel. Gabriel is an angel. Most of you know this. You know this because of Luke chapter 1. Where the angel Gabriel appears first to Zechariah to speak of the coming child, John the Baptist, and then to speaks to Mary later in the same chapter to speak of the coming child, of course, Jesus. And so we know of Gabriel, and Gabriel is given a command. It seems to me there's only two possibilities as to who gives him the command. It's either the pre-incarnate Christ, as some might hold, or more likely, in my opinion, it is the archangel Michael. You say, well, where on earth do you get that from? Well, you're going to see in a few chapters' time. Michael comes up multiple times in the book of Daniel, and in chapter 10, he's going to be there again in chapter 12, and Michael, being an archangel, can give orders, and it seems that in the context of the book of Daniel, it is more likely to me that it's Michael, but we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 10. So, Gabriel has been given the order by this mysterious other being to explain the vision to Daniel. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and I fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. Now, this is going to be a crucial expression. So this angelic being, and by the way, the idea that an angelic being is human-like doesn't mean that they're not scary. They seem to be large and big and powerful, and Daniel falls down. It's interesting, he falls in fear. There's no indication of worship here, but he is nonetheless less overwhelmed by this sight. And he's told to understand that the vision is for the time of the end. So the vision is for the purpose of the time of the end. Now, it's going to become clearer in a few verses' time, but I want you to understand that already that I think that what is being said here is that there are things that have been spoken of that will come to pass in the future, but the purpose of the vision is for the very end. In other words, I'm telling you things about the Medo-Persian and Greek kingdoms for the purpose that you would have a better understanding of the very end. We know more about the Antichrist because of this vision where the parallel is made with Antiochus Epiphanes. It would be much easier for people to just brush aside, oh, there's not going to be a literal Antichrist, don't be silly, as many still try and do. It would be much easier to do that if there wasn't a historical figure who is given to us as a direct parallel of the same kind of ruler. But the fact that there was a historical ruler that lived and did certain things, and there will be another that is parallel to him, makes it much harder to do that. And so the purpose of the vision is for the end, the time of the end. And when he'd spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. Now, verse 18 here is a strange verse in the midst of it. Is it that he took him back into a vision state? Or is it simply that it's just emphasizing how overwhelmed he is by the angelic encounter? It's not entirely clear. But he certainly seems to pass out in some degree. But then whether in the midst of that sleep, whether in a vision or whether he's just kind of collapsed and he has to be raised up, we don't know. Remember, he is 69 years of age at this point. But nonetheless, he is lifted up and he stands up. And it's important that he does, because verse 19, behold, I will make known to you what will be at the latter end of the indignation. Daniel is being given a very privileged position here, where he is going to be given revelation that has not been given before and details that have not been given before, and he will be given understanding, and so he shall stand up to receive those marching orders, as it were. The time of indignation is another expression. The Bible elsewhere refers to it as the day of the Lord. That's the most common and most used expression, which is, by the way, why I don't like Christians calling Sunday the Lord's Day. The Lord's Day grammatically is no different than the day of the Lord. That's all it means. The Lord's Day, the day of the Lord, grammatically it's the same thing. And the day of the Lord is the most commonly used expression of a time of indignation and judgment upon the earth. We typically refer to it as the tribulation. But that is nonetheless what it is. And so he makes it clear that he is going to be told what will happen at the latter end of the indignation. Now, you could argue that the indignation refers more generally to the time of the Gentiles, so I don't think it does. But certainly, even if it is that, it's the latter end of that. He says, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. So, I keep saying this to you guys, but repetition really makes a point, doesn't it? And he says, appointed time of the end at the end of verse 19. Previously in verse 19, at the latter end of the indignation. And then verse 17, it said the vision is for the time of the end. Do you see the repetition of end, end, end? This is not just something that is being spoken of, that it's going to happen, in a little bit in the future, Medo-Persian kingdom, maybe a little bit further on, Greek kingdom, but he's emphasizing that he's going to be speaking about stuff that's going to happen at the end. At the end of the end. At the end of the end of the end. You get my drift, right? We're going right to the very end, and this is what is being spoken of. So Daniel is being given a prophecy regarding the end. That becomes very clear. And then he says what the vision represents. And this is the bit we can skim because we dealt with this a lot last week. As for the ram you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. So that's what we concluded last time, and we understand that the Medo-Persian kingdom, which we've already seen in the book of Daniel, because Daniel's not completely chronological. We saw in the history of Daniel how in chapter 5, the Babylonian kingdom was overrun by the Medo-Persian kingdom. We saw in chapter 6, him under Darius, who was a Medo-Persian ruler. And then in verse 21, the goat is the king of Greece. This is the king that was never seen by Daniel. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. That's an interesting expression, and it shouldn't surprise us this far into the book of Daniel. But the goat itself is the king of Greece, but the horn is the first king. In other words, there is a sense in which kingdom is kind of the same main thing, but there are often within that kingdom many different kings. We saw that with Nebuchadnezzar. You, O Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. But then Nebuchadnezzar dies, and there are other Babylonian kings, and we're still in the head of gold. So we see that there. Verse 22. And by the way, the first king of the Greek Empire, as we've said, is Alexander the Great. And historically speaking, in the sense of, if you're a historian, he is the main Greek leader. Everybody knows Alexander the Great, right? He's the important one. But verse 22 tells us that for us, it's actually not the main point. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. So Alexander is broken, 4 others arise, 4 kingdoms, plural, arise from his nation, but not with his power. And so after this period of civil war for 20 years, the 4 generals have the 4 sections of the Greek Empire, and there are now 4 separate kingdoms that arise. Now, they're still the goat, the Greek kingdom, but it's significant that they are referred to here as 4 kingdoms, plural, as we'll see. Then it says this, but not with his power, which is simply to say that they never had the power that Alexander the Great did, which we know historically. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. Now, this is the crucial verse of the whole chapter, okay? Because in the vision there was a little horn that came up from one of the four, and he is going through this vision, you would at this point think, he's talking about that little horn, which we know historically to be Antiochus Epiphanes. But there is a key distinction that is made here. He says, as for their kingdom, singular. Now the prophets do this routinely in that the shift of some minor detail, singular to plural, becomes incredibly significant. Those of you who were with us as we were going years ago through the first chapters of Isaiah, we did the first 39 chapters of Isaiah over a couple of years in the evening services, we saw in Isaiah 7, the famous passage that prophesies the virgin birth of the Messiah. We saw that there was this sign that was given to the house of, to Ahaz, the king, and it was you, singular, and then there is suddenly this shift to you, plural, because the sign is being given to the house of David. And some people have gotten confused because they say, the vision is not a virgin birth, it's not going to be a literal virgin birth, because they don't see the shift from singular to plural. There's a sign to Ahaz involving Isaiah's son when he reaches an age where he's able to, discern good from evil. And then there is the sign to the house of David, you plural. So the shift from singular to plural can be really quite significant. And what's happening here is that the previous kingdoms are the kingdoms of the four generals of Alexander who took over. And now it says their kingdom, singular, which seems to be a shift. We've got their, plural, kingdom, singular. The whole of this book of Daniel is dealing prophetically with the time of the Gentiles. The Gentiles, plural, have a kingdom, singular, that is expressed through this various kingdoms, plural. In other words, what seems to be happening now is that there is a shift from the specifics of the Greek kingdom to the absolute end of the time of the Gentiles. And you say, well, isn't that a little bit confusing? Because you're expecting him to talk about the little horn here. Yes, that's the whole point. The whole point is we are coming now to the little horn, and now we're going to shift you to the very, very end of the kingdom, because he's drawing those parallels. We see a very similar thing where we see both in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, we see the prophecies of the Davidic covenant, where what is expressed is almost identical, but one of those prophecies is about someone who will sin and will be forgiven, and that is Solomon. And then there is another one who is a descendant of David, who is spoken of in almost identical terms, but he won't sin, and there will be no need for forgiveness. And that is speaking of Jesus the Messiah. And yet the terminologies are almost identical, that you might think it's the same event being reported in two different parts of the Bible. But the differences are crucial. And again, this is not uncommon in the Bible. So what we're seeing here is a shift from plural to singular to point out that this is slightly different. And at the same time, what is happening here is we're shifting to the very end of time, and we're doing so at when you would expect there to be talk about the little horn of the Greek Empire, because the parallels are going to be made. And as we go through this description of this little horn, this king, we're going to see again how this isn't Antiochus Epiphanes. We're going to clearly see that this is different. And bear in mind again, this is the book of Daniel, which is chronologically after the book of Isaiah, where there has already been a very significant prophecy a couple of times of this last king. So this is not completely new. Daniel is not getting new revelation here in the sense of there will be a final ruler. Daniel is getting additional revelation about the final ruler. So let's go through what he says about him. Verse 23, and the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face. The transgressors reaching their limit is very familiar to what Paul says in Thessalonians, and also perhaps in Romans, where he talks about like the fullness of Gentiles coming in. There's a time in which those who have transgressed, the bad rulers of the world, have reached their limit, and they will end with this one king who is a king of bold face. That means he is insolent. He is one who will do as he wishes and won't really listen to anybody else. And we know that there are plenty of rulers like that in this day and age, and we've seen many in this era and in this period of time. But he will be one of bold face. And then it says, who understands riddles. So a king of bold face who understands riddles will arise. The phrase understands riddles is exactly the same expression that was used of Daniel. That earlier on in the book of Daniel, that Daniel was one who understood riddles. In Daniel chapter 5 and verse 12. So in other words, Daniel is a man of great humility who understands riddles. This one is a man of great pride who understands riddles. Now, I want you to understand this parallel, and this is very important. And this is the first point where we realize this is different from Antiochus Epiphanes, okay? This person is going to see visions, is going to have angelic visitations, is going to have access to the supernatural realm in the way that Daniel does. And he's not a good guy. The supernatural nature of the Antichrist is spoken of here. And he shall arise. Verse 24. His power shall be great, but not his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction. And he shall succeed in what he does, and he shall destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. There's several things said about him there. Firstly, he's going to be a man that has mighty power. But the power that he has will come from elsewhere. Again, this isn't new. Isaiah 13 says the same thing. Isaiah 13 talks about Satan and the Antichrist, and it almost blurs into one. He is empowered by Satan. Just as Daniel is empowered by God, so the Antichrist is empowered by Satan. And that's going to become clearer again when we come to chapter 11. Again, we haven't finished with this character that is so crucial to the book of Daniel. But he will have power, but that power will come from elsewhere. That's what we saw last time with all these repetitions of power coming from elsewhere, all the references to the angelic realm. It says he will literally destroy wonderfully. There will be much destruction. He will prosper, and his plans will come to pass. And in doing so, he will destroy both leaders and he will destroy the saints. The saints that will be destroyed will be those who believe at that time, and also I believe it references the Jewish people as becomes clearer as we learn more about him as Scripture progresses. But he will destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Two things very crucial here. His reign will be seen through great deception. Now that's interesting to me. Very interesting. As we've gone through the book of Daniel, we've seen lots of mighty rulers. We've seen Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar would just go in and take a land, and he got it. God pretty much gave him whatever he wanted to take. The Medo-Persians come in and they just kind of take over. When the Medo-Persian Empire goes, that ram is trampled by the goat. Alexander didn't come and say, hey, pick a card, any card, and do a little trick of deception. He just, boom, went in and trampled, right? That's what we're seeing with these kings. But this one will come to power through deception. Isn't that so much more what rulers are like in our day and age? That people, How many politicians have you seen in your lifetime that have made campaign promises and have actually kept them? I mean, it seems as if that's the standard way of getting into a position of power today, is you promise something and have no intention of doing it. Just deception. And that's going to be the thing that will highlight his power, is that he will deceive. And he will come about through deceitfulness to get to a place of power. But secondly, the other thing in that expression is that in his own mind he shall become great. He will magnify himself. And the thing that makes the thing that makes the little horn have his abomination of desolation, both with Antiochus Epiphanes and with the Antichrist, is them taking over the place of the worship of God and declaring themselves to be God. And that's not wanting to re-emphasize too much what I said last time. That is why the government of our country trying to tell churches that they could or couldn't meet, or they could meet, but they had to jump through these hoops and do this and that. That is why, though it's not this exactly, that's why it's so significant, because rulers thinking that they are above God and can tell the people of God things that God hasn't told them to do. God says, don't forsake meeting together, and the rulers say, oh, sorry, you're actually going to have to do that for a while. Taking the place of God, government taking the place of God and saying, we are now in charge and you won't worship God the way that you want, we'll tell you how you can do it. This is astonishingly significant. And it cannot be allowed to happen. And I do hope that when the governments of the world try it again, which you know they will, that many in the church have learnt through the whole coronavirus experience and have learnt the limitations of government. And many of us have learnt through this whole this period of time. And so the emphasis here is that the Antichrist will declare himself to be God, and he will do so, as we'll discover later, in the temple of God. He will take over the place of God's worship, that he himself can be declared to be God. Again, not the same as what happened in our time, but again, you can see the similarities and the grave concern that we should have regarding such things. Then we have this expression, without warning he shall destroy many. That there is this destroying of many without warning implies that there is this place of security, that no one's expecting him to do anything. Hey, trust me, I'm here for your good. I'm here to look after you, I'm here to help you. The one thing that concerns me about the ever-encroaching power of government is that government wants to become God and take more and more control over our lives. Now we're in charge of this. Now we're in charge of that. Oh, we'll have a bit of this now. Oh, we'll have a bit of that now. And they take more and more control. And what we're starting to see as well is if you don't do the right things, if you don't say the right things, if you don't support the right things, then suddenly all of these things that government control might be taken away from you. And this is, of course, the danger that will happen is that power is going to be given to this king, and there will be this thinking that this will be okay. He's a good guy. Things are going to be good. The devil always comes as an angel of light. Arnold Fruchtenbaum tells the story about how somebody once said to him, I know who the Antichrist is going to be. This is many, many years ago. And he said, who is it? Arnold just humoring him at this point. I think maybe a lady humoring her. And she said, it's Manuel Noriega. Do you remember that whole crisis back with was it Panama and all of that? And he said, how do you know that? Because he's really ugly. It's kind of humorous. I mean, but you know, we have, again, like we have angels with wings in all this imagery, we have Satan with horns and this red devil and what have you. Satan appears as an angel of light. When the enemy tries to lead you astray, he doesn't come as someone ugly and unpleasant. He comes as that attractive person to lead you astray. He comes as the one promising you wealth, promising you acceptance, promising you good feelings, promising you all sorts of things. And when we come, after we have Easter Sunday next Sunday, when we come back to Daniel after that, and we come to chapter 9, we're going to see more about this promise of security that the Antichrist specifically gives to the Jewish people. Do you remember a time when there was peace in the Middle East? I'm getting quite old now, and I don't remember a time when there was peace in the Middle East. I'm seeing people older than me shaking their heads. They don't remember it either. So if somebody comes along and can accomplish peace in the Middle East, is that going to be a good person or a bad person in the eyes of the world? Boy, that's going to be a good person. And it is at that time when there is security, at that time when it is not expected, it is the time without warning that he shall then rise up and destroy many. And as we come into chapter 9, this word many is going to be repeated and become quite significant. And this destruction of the many will be the destruction of the Jewish people, as will become clear. And so this Antichrist will rise up, declare himself to be God, and then come and destroy the people of God. And this is not isolated to Daniel. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we see the Antichrist declaring himself to be God. Revelation chapter 13, we see the same thing. And we're not going to be coming up to Revelation in the Bible reading plan until the end of the year. So we'll have finished Daniel at that point. But I just want to encourage you. I've said this a few times before, but I think it's worth repeating because I really want you to get it into your noggins, as they say. Too many people have said that Revelation is not understandable. There is nothing in the book of Revelation from chapter 4 to chapter 19 that is new. Nothing. It is simply given a few little additional details and it's put into chronological sequence. So when we see in Revelation 13 this beast that rises up and declares himself to be God and demands worship, we don't go, oh, what is this strange thing? I've never come across this before. We say, aha, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 9. We know these things because they've already happened. And so if Revelation is confusing to you, mostly it's because you haven't read your Old Testament. And that's why we so strongly encourage the Bible reading plan, because every single year that you do it, you're going to see things you didn't see the year before. You're going to be, oh, well, now we're doing Daniel, so now when you come to Isaiah 13 and see stuff about the Antichrist, you're going to say, I see the connections with Daniel. When you come to Revelation, you're going to go, aha, I see the connections with Daniel. And all these connections that you make this year mean that when you start again next year in Genesis, you're going to see more connections that you haven't seen before. Just keep reading your Bible year after year after year after year. And every year, you're going to see multiple things that you haven't seen previously. It never ceases to amaze me how, when Jen and I read together, we just see things we haven't seen previously. Just like, wow, how come I haven't seen that before? Doesn't that remind you of this or remind you of that? I'm finding that this year, as we're going through the Psalms, I've become so much more intimately familiar with the Psalms over the last few years, that I'm seeing connections in the Psalms with the rest of Scripture I just wasn't seeing in previous years. So be encouraged. And this is repeated, as I say, in 2 Thessalonians and Revelation 13. So, he shall rise up again, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. So he declares himself great. As we'll see, he declares himself to be God, like Antiochus Epiphanes, abomination of desolation and what have you. He declares himself to be great. He rises up, he surprises people and destroys many, and he is so arrogant with his bold face. He is so full of himself and his might. Remember, he sees visions. He has demonic information given to him in the angelic realm that other people don't have. He sees things and knows things, and he thinks he's so darn great, and he's so great in his own eyes that he comes against the prince of princes, the ruler of rulers. And the one thing that we can be clear about this far on to the book of Daniel is that Daniel has made the point again and again and again. There are great kings, but there is a king above all kings. There are great rulers that are coming, but there is a ruler above all rulers. And has been made clear, and again, you see again here why he's not talking about the little horn of the Greek kingdom. that there is this ruler of rulers who will come at the very, very end. And now we are at the very, very end, as he's been trying to emphasize. And he's saying that he will go against the Prince of Princes. He will rise up against Christ. I don't want you to think, I mean, in our eyes this is foolish, and of course it is foolish, but I don't want you to think that he is somehow, not thinking this. But the Antichrist honestly believes that he will defeat Christ. Remember, Isaiah 53 spoke about the suffering of the Messiah, yes? And yet, we're told in John's Gospel that when Judas betrayed Jesus, that Satan entered into him. Satan possessed Judas because it was his intent that Jesus would be betrayed and crucified. Satan wanted Jesus to die. And yet in doing that, he destroyed himself. The Antichrist honestly will believe that he can defeat Jesus. But he will be broken. He will be broken, and not by human hands. Again, the deity of Christ, loud and clear in the Old Testament. He will be broken. Does this not remind us of that crucial passage of Genesis 3? You will crush his head, and he will bruise your heel. Again, he will be broken, and he will be crushed by the Prince of Princes, by no human hand. And so it is that the end will come. And so with that end, Daniel says the vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. As we said before, Daniel is this most fascinating book in that Daniel prophesied he saw visions, and at the beginning, the vision that the king had, that then Daniel is able to interpret because he's able to say what the vision is, that first vision, that some of it is actually happening at the time. You, O Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. And then there were other parts of the visions that were prophesied for the future that Daniel lived to see. There were other parts of the vision that Daniel never lived to see, but that have become history for us. Alexander the Great, for example. But there are other things that are still yet to come to pass. When Alexander's one king splits into 4 kingdoms, you can look at history and say, aha, I see when that happened. But when in the final Gentile kingdom, it splits from east to west 2 feet into 10 toes, we don't see that clearly in history yet. We just don't see it. It hasn't happened yet. When we look at the little horn of the Greek kingdom, Antiochus Epiphanes, we see the abomination of desolation. We see him, the rules he made. If you circumcise your children, then they will be killed, and you will be strangled by them being wrapped around your own neck. We will not have you Jews being Jews anymore. We saw it in history. But we haven't seen this one yet. And it's not just figurative. It's not just something figurative of a spiritual kingdom that would do an injustice to the text. This is something that will come to pass. And so it needs to be sealed up, because it will happen many days from now. And Daniel is overcome, and he lays sick for some days. He's so overwhelmed by the horror of what he has seen that he is basically sick for a while afterwards. And then he rises up, he's able to get back to life, went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. One of the things is that Daniel saw so much, and yet he didn't fully understand it. He didn't know how this was going to happen, how it was going to come about. Although he's going to understand more, because he's going to get another vision in the next chapter that's going to give him more details about these things. But what he did see and what he did understand was appalling and left him just sick to his stomach. He wasn't able to function or get on with life. because it was such a horrific thing. One criticism that is given of those who believe that there will be a time of indignation, one criticism that is given to those of us who believe that there will be a coming Antichrist is why are we looking forward to this? Why are we looking forward to this point in time? It is one of the most unfair criticisms that can be given. Let me tell you why. So much revelation. There's no point in human history where an increase in revelation concerning the Antichrist is given than was given to Daniel. In chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 11, and so on. There's just so much information that is given about the Antichrist to Daniel. Was Daniel a person who looked forward to a terrible time in history? Oh, we're all waiting for the tribulation. Is that Daniel? That's not Daniel. Daniel is the one whose eyes are focused on God, who is the King of Kings. And he is the one who has been saying, well, there's this kingdom, there's this kingdom, there's this kingdom. But then at the end, there is the kingdom that will cover the entire earth, and that will be a kingdom that will reign forever and ever. Because he who has all authority will come and take authority that is his, and he will rule and reign forevermore. Daniel's eyes are firmly focused on Jesus. So for us to have understanding of the Antichrist, of what the Bible teaches about him, of a time of tribulation, of the day of the Lord, of all of these kind of things, is not to say that we are people who are simply waiting for the Antichrist to come. We are not. Let's be absolutely clear on that point. The Antichrist may come in our lifetime, might already be here. But he might not come in your children's generation, or your grandchildren's, or your great-grandchildren's, or your great-great-grandchildren. You've got no idea. But you know who might come at any given moment? Jesus Christ. It seems bizarre to me that the people who believe in tribulation, the people who believe in Antichrist, the people who believe in these things, are also the people who believe in a rapture. And we're told that we're looking forward to these terrible things. We're just waiting for Jesus to come back. I have a friend who often posts up and says, when they're having a hard time, they put on social media, they don't grumble, they just say, today will be a good day for a rapture. I remember being a younger guy and just really struggling with this idea of wanting Jesus to return, you know? Because I was a young guy, I had so much of life to live, and man, as the years go by, I'm like, yeah, any time would be good. Any time would be good. And it's not just that I'm older than I used to be, and it's not just that life has dealt many blows, though it has. It's just as you mature in your faith, you just come ever more to the realization that you just want to be free from your sin. You just want to be free from the effects of sin. You just want to be with Jesus. He is the one that we're waiting for. He is the one that we are seeking after. And he is the one who could come at any moment. Man, I hope he comes midway through a sermon. That would be great, wouldn't it? Go, be taken home by him while we're speaking of him. That would be marvelous. But Daniel tells us things that will happen historically for good reason. When Daniel spoke of the coming Medo-Persian kingdom, when the Medo-Persian kingdom came, people could say, that's this. When the Greek kingdom came, that's this. When Antiochus Epiphanes came up, this is what we're expecting. So now, when the Antichrist does come, the people who are here will be able to say, the Bible spoke of this as well. And I hope and I pray and I truly believe that when that happens, there will be many who will turn to Christ. And we know, and I don't want to get into the book of Revelation now, but we know as we chronologically go through the book of Revelation that it is at that time that we will see some of the greatest revivals that we've ever seen. That people will rise up and proclaim the gospel. You ever been bamboozled by the 144,000 of Revelation? Jehovah's Witnesses think that that's the number of people in heaven, and all the tickets have been sold, by the way. You're out of luck. But no, in the context of Revelation, the flow of Revelation, you have the 144,000 that God raises up, and then that leads to a massive revival. And there will be, as these things are fulfilled, people saying, oh, oh, oh. And God will use it to open eyes and to draw people to himself. So prophecy is valuable, but the time it becomes most valuable is the time that it comes to pass. Let's leave it there. We will, next Sunday is Easter Sunday, and we will take a break from the book of Daniel, and we shall be spending our time at the cross and at the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as is right. And then we will come to Daniel 9, which I've been looking forward to for months. And we will see this Antichrist and who he is expanded upon further, but the focus will come firmly on the one that will rise up to break him. It will firmly be on the Prince of Princes. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word, and we thank you that, Lord, as we go through it verse by verse, as we unpack it, that we see everything. We see praises to you in the Psalms. We see narratives speaking of what has occurred and what you said and what you did. And Father, we see also prophecies of what is yet to come. May we come to love the entirety of your word. And as we do so, Lord, may we have our eyes ever on you and on the return of your Son, who when he comes will destroy the beast with the breath of his mouth, who will establish his kingdom that will have no end, that we might dwell with him securely forever. And as we have studied that last ruler before the coming king, Lord, may our eyes as we go out be on the king that will come, the Prince of Princes. May we rejoice that there is a day coming when we will be resurrected, when our bodies will no longer age and be frail, when sin will no longer have any place in us, when sin will no longer have any place in us, and we will be able to worship you with the kind of worship that you are truly worthy of. And as we go out this day, Lord, though we still fight and struggle with sin, we rejoice in the victory we have in Christ. And we pray that our lives may be lives of worship and sacrifice, and it might evermore become acceptable in your sight. Amen.